people killed in California after another mass shooting. The suspect still at large. We begin in Israel for you this evening. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant now in a feud with the second minister in his ministry, Bezalel Smotrich. Now this over the evacuation of an illegal West Bank outpost. National Security Minister and right-wing leader Itamar Ben-Gvir now demanding the deconstruction of the Khan al-Ahmar Bedouin village. i24NEWS defense correspondent Jonathan Regev with the details.
It was just a matter of time until Israel's complicated coalition agreements would lead to a clash between its members, and that time came on Friday. The decision to evacuate an illegal West Bank outpost set up by settlers was taken by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as he has the authority over anything happening in the West Bank. This has always been the case, but this time, thanks to a coalition deal, there's a second minister in the Ministry of Defense. Bezalel Smotrich is not only the finance minister, but also that second minister, asking to be in charge of the civil aspects of control over the West Bank through the civil administration. He asked for the evacuation to stop, but Gallant says he has the authority over the issue and insists that it should continue. Gallant also has the backing of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as the Prime Minister's office issued a statement saying the government supports settlement, but only when it is done legally and is coordinated in advance with the Prime Minister and security officials, which was not done in this case. The statement also added a discussion on this issue will be held this week, but that did not satisfy Smotrich, who ordered all of his party's ministers not to attend the Sunday morning cabinet meeting. The ministers from the other far-right party in the coalition, Jewish Power, attended the cabinet meeting, but party leader Itamar Ben-Gvir said that if Jewish illegal outposts are evicted, the same should apply for Arab outposts. Ben-Gvir is specifically speaking of Khan al-Ahmar, a Bedouin village east of Jerusalem, which the Israeli High Court of Justice determined could be evicted nearly 5 years ago, but it never happened.
There will be no one law for Jews and one law for Arabs. No such thing. If you implement the law, it will be implemented on Khan al-Ahmar and tens of other Arab outposts. The same law for everybody. There will be no discrimination.
It was less than a week ago, in the change of guard ceremony of the IDF Chief of Staff, when the defense minister said all political considerations will be kept away from the army.
I will work to make sure that the Chief of Staff can fulfill his duties, while I will ensure that outside pressure, political, legal, or any other, stops with me and does not reach the IDF.
It didn't take too long for the political pressure to find him.
Let's bring in Olivier Arapovich, a senior security and military consultant, also a fellow at the Jerusalem Institute of Strategy and Security. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Talk to us about under what reasoning, legally speaking, without ideology, without religious beliefs, what are Bezalel Smotrich and Ben-Gvir arguing here when it comes to opposing the evacuation of that illegal outpost?
Good evening. First of all, we have to say that the government of Israel, Prime Minister and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have decided, and Benjamin Netanyahu has backed actually the decision of Yoav Gallant as a defense minister to evacuate, to make this illegal outpost out of the area, because it's illegal. So it's a very, I would say, normal decision. And we cannot forget that during this decision, there was also a visit in Israel of the assistant for security at the White House. So it was very important for Israel to show the American government, but to show also the government that the defense minister is in charge of defense affairs in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. Now, what you're asking is also very important, because Bezalel Smotrich is also, like you just mentioned, a minister within the Ministry of Defense, which is totally a new thing. A new thing because he has actually new responsibilities mostly concerning Jews or Jewish people living in the sea area in the West Bank. Now, for now, on the paper, it's okay. But when it comes to the field, it could be a problem, and this problem was actually a problem during this Friday issue when the decision by Yoav Gallant was not accepted by Smotrich, but because also Smotrich has now the tools to make this decision obsolete. So we are in a political game, in a political arena within security issues. It's very complicated, but for the time being, Netanyahu, the prime minister, is actually backing Yoav Gallant's decision.
Well, Itamar Ben-Gvir now demanding for the deconstruction of what he says are 6 illegal Palestinian structures built in Area C. Now, Area C, for those unfamiliar, falls under Israeli jurisdiction, whereas Area A and B under the Palestinian Authority. What's his reasoning for this? Now, we just heard in Jonathan Regev's report that the High Court did rule that that Bedouin village should be deconstructed 5 years ago, but why hasn't it happened?
For many reasons. First are humanitarian reasons. People are living there, and besides the legal or strict legal issues, there are also humanitarian issues. Sometimes there are pressures or I would say wishes from foreign government, like the American or some European countries who are asking the state of Israel, please don't do it now because it's a humanitarian issue and we are asking you not to do it. So when you decide something concerning Palestinian issues, even if it's illegal, but it's not really with human rights or human law, Israel is actually checking very carefully every move. I believe it's a very right move from the Israeli side, but it can be actually opposed for political reasons by parties like Itamar Ben-Gvir party.
So this new government is planning for the construction of several thousand housing units in other settlements that they deem as legal, and they are going to give building permits for those, but to the Palestinians, really not so much. Those are very rarely issued, as we know. Will this policy continue under this new government, or will it actually only get worse?
I don't want to give any mark, worse or better. It's not the point here. The point here, if I may, is what is I would say the freedom of movement for any Israeli government when you deal with the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, when you have also connection with Arab states who are also asking you, please don't do that or do that, because for us it's very important. I'm talking about the Saudis who are right now asking the Israeli government to solve the Palestinian issue, and maybe in exchange they will sign some agreement with Israel. Maybe they will join the Abraham agreements, Abraham Accords. So altogether, even when you move one house or you decide to build a new settlement or even to plan a new settlement, it's high politics. It's even international politics. And the Israeli government now, with Netanyahu, even if it's a right-wing government, is also a very, I would say, clever government, and they will take the right decisions according to global Israeli interest. And it's a very complicated issue, but that's why you have Netanyahu and you have Gallant deciding what they're deciding, even if it's sometimes complicated on a strict political level with other members of the coalition, but maybe we will see it in the future.
Olivier Arapovich live in studio with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, still to come. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fired ultra-Orthodox leader Aryeh Deri from a ruling after Israel's High Court. And over 100,000 people gathering in Tel Aviv for anti-government demonstrations for the 3rd week in a row. This is the rundown on i24 News. Stay with us.
It's a living, breathing organism that pulsates through millennia. Touch it, listen to it, smell it, taste it. Experience the Holy Land like never before. Holy Holy Land Uncovered, every Sunday, only on i24NEWS.
Sometimes it's tough to get past all the noise and get to the heart of the story. Even tougher to make sense of it all. I'm David Matlin, and each weekday I'll take on the most important topics, breaking down the issues so you can decide for yourself. Zoom in each weekday here at i24NEWS.
Hey, it's you again. Ready? Let's go. One show, a whole lot of perspective.
He is part of the problem.
You want to talk about deplatforming? People are losing their lives.
Not just what happened, but why does it matter?
I'd like to finish my point.
You're the one stretching terms here.
You could be a fantastic CNN reporter.
Join us every night, 8 p.m. Eastern on Global Eye. The global conversation starts here.
Imagine being able to see into the future.
What innovations will change the world as we know it? Join us as we meet the people changing our planet and discover the inventions shaping tomorrow.
Israel Business Beat, Sundays and Wednesdays, 9:30 p.m. GMT.
Welcome back to the Rundown. Thanks for staying with us. More Israeli politics now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fired ultra-Orthodox leader Aryeh Deri from his ministerial roles after a decision by the High Court disqualified him from government positions. The ruling was decided as a result of his past criminal convictions and his promise to resign from politics as part of a plea deal for a conviction for tax fraud just last year. While firing the Shas leader from his roles, Netanyahu vowing to find a, quote, legal way for Deri to continue serving. Netanyahu now needs to find new ministers to take over as both the health and interior minister. i24NEWS senior correspondent Owen Alterman has more.
At the weekly meeting of the Israeli cabinet on this Sunday in Jerusalem, a focus on internal Israeli politics. In the run-up to the meeting, a lot of attention focused on the leader of the ultra-Orthodox Shas party, Aryeh Deri, as we turn to Israeli politics. Deri, not in his usual chair next to Netanyahu at the top of the meeting, arriving ceremoniously late, passing us journalists on his way in. But Deri left the cabinet meeting no longer as Israel's interior or health minister, Netanyahu having fired him. Following the decision from Israel's Supreme Court last Wednesday, Netanyahu reading out a letter saying he did so reluctantly and that he felt that the decision was against the will of voters. Deri responding to the firing by saying that no judicial decision will stop him from serving the public. For now, Owen Alterman, i24NEWS in Jerusalem.
Still with the story now, over 100,000 people gathered in Tel Aviv last night to protest against the judicial reforms proposed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government. It was the largest demonstration against the plan. Now, demonstrations also held in Jerusalem, Haifa, and Beersheba. The protests at two locations in Tel Aviv spilling into surrounding streets, blocking traffic, but there were no confrontations with police, as some might have feared. And this time, opposition political leaders taking part in the rallies, including Yesh Atid party head and former Prime Minister Yair Lapid, former Defense Minister Benny Gantz, among others. Take a listen to Lapid last night.
What you see here today is a demonstration in support of the country. People who love the country have come here today to defend its democracy, to defend its courts, to defend the idea of coexistence and of common good. There are people here who love Israel, who came to demonstrate for a democratic Jewish state according to the values of the Declaration of Independence, and we will not give up until we win.
Let's bring in Professor Yisrael Uman, a Nobel laureate in economic sciences and a professor emeritus at the Hebrew University, joining us live from Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being with us. Israel's Justice Minister Yariv Levin says that these judicial reforms are quite long overdue and they're aimed at strengthening democracy. But the opposition says quite the opposite, that it will weaken democracy and make the government actually more authoritarian. than democratic. There have been calls to reform the judiciary in Israel for years. Give us your take on the topic.
Well, there's supposed to be a separation of powers between the judiciary and the people that make the laws, the legislative part of the government. And in fact, the judiciary has taken over much of the legislative function of the government. Even the former Supreme Court President Barak, who introduced in the 90s all these changes, giving the judiciary power to repeal, to override laws, to declare laws invalid. Even he said that the judiciary acts as a legislative body, as it can legislate, and there's the problem is that the judiciary is very activist and it appoints itself in the government committee that appoints judges. There are 3 Supreme Court judges on the committee, and they have a veto over the appointment of judges. So no less activist or more conservative judges, they cannot be appointed because the 3 out of the 9 members of the committee that appoints judges are Supreme Court judges themselves. And you need 7 out of 9 to appoint a new judge. Now, it's fine to have the judiciary have a say. It's fine to have them overrule the legislative branch of the government, as long as it's not always the same philosophy, the same ideology, a very activist ideology. If you have a sort of a balance of views on the Supreme Court, that's okay, and that's what the reform wants to bring about. That there should be a more balanced Supreme Court as far as the ideological stance is concerned.
Is there a way, you think, to find a compromise in all of this? The left and the opposition making it pretty clear they're not going to support or approve any of these reforms. The president even trying to mediate between both sides. So can the government find a compromise or a middle ground?
I think a compromise. I'm not in favor of all the proposed changes. Some of the changes should be implemented, and some of the changes should not be implemented. I was not in favor of all of them, and I think there should be a compromise. But it has to be remembered that now there are 64 out of 120 members of parliament that are in favor of these reforms, and it forms a majority, and we live in a democracy. We do not live in a place where there's an oligarchy of people who consider themselves smarter and better than everybody else. We live in a place where all citizens are equal. And a clear majority of those citizens voted for the parties that are now initiating a judicial reform. And this reform is long overdue, okay? The problems did not start until the 90s of the last century. And during that time, Chief Justice Aaron Barak made all these changes, and it's not it's something which has to be reversed now. We have to go back to the tradition that was nearer the beginning of the state, when the Supreme Court was balanced ideologically, and then it was never that activist. And now it has become very, very activist, very much interfering also in the executive branch, in the carrying out of rules and making appointments. It has become very activist, and that is not a good thing. I mean, the Supreme Court, in some sense, should be just like the Supreme Court can overrule certain laws. It should be that the Supreme Court is balanced as far as ideologically. It should not be slanted ideologically to one side or the other.
Professor Israel Uman, a Nobel laureate in economic sciences and a professor emeritus at Hebrew University, joining us live on the continued debate in the judicial reforms. We'll certainly see how it all plays out in the coming weeks. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, the two longest-serving Palestinian security prisoners in Israeli jails were back in custody for a brief period over the weekend following their recent release. But this time, they were questioned on potential new charges of incitement. Palestinian cousins Meher and Karim Yunus from North Israel, both serving 40 years for killing an IDF soldier in 1980. They were given a hero's welcoming when they returned to their hometown in Arara. And on Saturday, they were detained and questioned over social media posts they made supporting the Palestinians. However, they were subsequently released. And across the Middle East, multiple currencies have marked new historic lows in recent days amid a continuing regional economic crisis. And despite the war in Ukraine, in many countries, prolonged conflict and years of mismanagement have finally caught up to some of them, sending their respective currencies into a free fall. I24NEWS Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
With the U.S. dollar making a roaring comeback, indicating an ease in inflation worldwide, some regional currencies, however, have recorded historic lows in recent days. In Egypt, for example, the local pound has lost nearly 45% of its value over the past year, after dropping more than 9% in one day this month against the U.S. dollar. And Egyptians are feeling the effects.
The prices change every day. Every merchant sells the goods for different prices. The problem is that we have no control over the markets.
I stopped buying meat. Chicken prices have now risen. I have 3 children. How will I cover their needs?
With salaries halved and banks restricting withdrawals, many analysts are calling Egypt the new Lebanon. There, too, the pound has hit a new low, trading at 50,000 pounds to $1, a devaluation of 95% since 2019. But Egyptians and Lebanese are not alone. In Iraq, hundreds of soccer fans chanted to their prime minister as he attended the final game of the Arabian Gulf Cup. That's because the exchange rate of the local dinar reached 1,659 to $1 Friday, the highest price since 2004.
The higher exchange rate is causing the market to be gradually paralyzed. There's no customer demand. Prices are very high. They get higher every day.
In neighboring Syria, where an economic crisis triggered by the years-long civil war and Western sanctions has led to the black market value of the local pound to skyrocket. And in Iran, where the government is drafting its budget for the next year, the local rial reached a new low against the U.S. dollar, trading at 449,000 to $1. And so, with shortages in foreign currency spreading across the region, 2023 is already turning out to be one of an exacerbating economic crisis across the Middle East.
Well, still to come, blatant displays of Islamophobia in Sweden after a right-wing party leader burned the Quran outside the Turkish embassy. And in the United States, 10 people killed in California after another mass shooting. The suspect still on the loose at this time. And in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky marking a national day of unity as intense fighting continues in several parts of the country. This is the rundown on i24NEWS.